Defense headquarters blames death of Sokoto villagers on secondary explosions during operations to neutralize Lakurawa terrorists in the northwest state. And National Security Advisor Nuhu Ribadu describes as baseless Niger's military leader's claims, that's from General Abdurrahman Chani, that Nigeria intends to destabilize his country by allowing terrorism enclave in parts of the north. Hello and welcome to Politics Today, reaching you live from our global headquarters here in the nation's commercial nerve center, Lagos. I'm Jeffrey Uzoma. Is the weekend edition of the program, 27 days in December, so we just have a few more days, if you will, to the end of 2024, and we'll be seeing a brand new year just pretty soon. So hey, what has been happening in the polity? Our job is to bring you up to speed as much as possible. But today, we're going to be heavy on two things, basically, given what has played out in the later part of today and the past few days. And that is security on one hand and issues of policy priority by the government led by Bola Tinubu. But let's begin the tracking of what's going on in the polity with further denial by the National Security Advisor Nuhu Ribadu on Nigeria being in cahoots with foreign nations to destabilize Niger Republic, as alleged by Niger's military leader General Abdurrahman Chani against Nigeria. Now, in an interview with the BBC Hausa, Ribadu describes the claims as baseless. General Chani had claimed Nigeria was setting up a military camp in the north in an area between Mongono and Baga in Borno State to destabilize Niger. Nigerian officials were conspiring to destabilize Niger through what he considers training camps for fighters in Sokoto, Zamfara, and Kebbi states. Now, Chani also alleged Nigeria had provided a base for French soldiers near Lake Chad. Well, in an emphatic response, Mr. Ribadu says these allegations are untrue, they are unfounded, and they are baseless, while urging Nigerian government to address their grievances with France without dragging Nigeria into their dispute. The NSA remarks follows a similar position shared by the federal government and ECOWAS that the claims by Niger's leadership are far from the truth. So that is going to be one of the big conversations we have today. But there are other security things going on in our country, and that has to do with the deaths that were recorded in Sokoto when our troops carried out an operation that neutralized about some terrorists, and 10 civilians were killed. And DHU had come out today through the spokesperson, the Defense Headquarters spokesperson, Edward Buba, saying that it wasn't the strike of the military or the troops that killed the civilians, but what he considers, what they describe as secondary explosion. I want you to listen to him.
I spoke about secondary explosions because one of the targets was a logistic base of the terrorists in the community. When I talk of logistic base, I'm talking of armed cartridges and poles that were kept there. So naturally, when the munition hits that, there will be secondary explosion arising from that, which will generate other things flying in the air, which was what led to the death of about 10 persons that were reported. The 10 persons reported were not hit directly by the airstrikes. The people that were hit directly by the airstrikes were the Lakurawa terrorist group, and they were burnt beyond recognition.
All right, so that is the position of the Defense Headquarters. So you hear from the spokesperson there, and it's going to be part of our conversation. In fact, that's where we'll start from. But let's bring you other political roundup stories.
Yobe State Governor Mai Mala Buni is seeking support for improved revenue generation as well as advancement of basic education for the development of the state. Governor Mai Mala Buni disclosed this at the swearing-in of the newly appointed Executive Chairman of the State Universal Basic Education Board and the Executive Chairman, State Internal Revenue Services at Government House, Damaturu. The governor also used the medium to present 50 million naira check to 500 returnees of Boko Haram who were trained in different skills to boost their businesses.
The Chairman Board of Internal Revenue is expected to work towards improving revenue generation, block all leakages and ensure remittance of all revenues collected into the government coffers, to fund government projects and programs.
Northern governors have been urged not to back down in their stance against the ongoing tax reforms until grey areas in the proposed bills are addressed. A former federal lawmaker, retired Major General Muhammad Magaro, made a call at a book launch in honor of Governor Nasru Idris of Kebbi State in the state capital, Benin Kebbi.
There is no justifiable reason for the haste being expressed, particularly by the Senate, in passing this bill. We inherited the PIB bill from the 6th Senate. Now, if the current Senate was the ones that finished up the PIB bill, why the haste on VAT tax bill? There is no justification.
In Anambra State, it is a heroic welcome for the national chairman of the All Progressives Grand Alliance, APGA, Mr. Sly Eziokenwa, to Anambra State after a landmark victory at the Supreme Court. While addressing the party faithful, the national chairman, Mr. Eziokenwa, says the victory is the consolidation of APGA as a party of the progressives and a political party that will bring hope to the common man.
APGA is a divine movement. It is not just a movement of the people, it is a divine movement, specially ordained by God. Otherwise, how do you explain that from 2004 or 2005, there were consistent attempts to destroy this platform?
Welcome back. So let's get straight to that conversation. It has to do with the incident that occurred in Sokoto on Christmas Day. And the military had carried out this airstrike. That is the fact. Lakurawa terrorists were killed or neutralized, as the military likes to refer. And we understand they were burnt beyond recognition. But 10 civilians were killed or died or were killed in the process. Now, the initial reaction was the government has said these civilians are just innocent villagers. They are not terrorists. The CDS, the Chief of Defense Staff, had also responded and said, look, if you harbor these people and you keep them in your space, then it's difficult to make a decision. And he was very strong on some of the things he said yesterday when he was, I think yesterday or so, when he was in Sokoto State. Like, if you harbor them, then you're going to bear the consequence of harboring. So there was this back and forth as to what exactly is the true picture. Were these civilians innocent civilians or not? But today, the DHQ has provided some level of clarity. We're going to probe further into that clarity provided. The DHQ is saying that their strike did not kill any civilian directly, but there were cache of ammunition in the logistics base of Lakurawa terrorists. So when they struck, it is the explosion from that secondary, they call it secondary explosion. So theirs is the primary target, and then whatever they targeted exploded, which is a secondary explosion. That is what led to the death of 10 persons. Let's talk about it with a security expert. Let him break it down for us, what all of this means. Kabiru Adamu is the CEO of Beacon Security and Intelligence Limited and a security consultant. Mr. Adamu, thank you so much for coming on the program.
My pleasure, Jeffrey. Good evening and nice to be here.
You are the expert here, so help us make sense of this initial, at least this further clarity, because yesterday we had disagreement between the government and the military as to what the picture is. Now they put out some sort of a clearer picture, which some people will still question as to the level of intelligence and all of that. So what's your first reaction to this release or statement by the DHQ?
Well, like you rightly indicated, it has added a little bit of clarity to the picture. But the challenge is that it does not address the core issue, which is the killing of innocent civilians. The target in this instance, we're told, is a logistics person for the group, Lakurawa. Is he of such high value that the military will take the decision to target him, knowing very well that there are either material for bombs or for improvised explosive devices, and that civilians can be killed in that instance. Now, if that is the case, what is the identity of that person? At what point will us as Nigerians be told who that individual is? I know that the spokesperson of the DHQ did mention that the targeted persons have been burnt beyond recognition, but then they should have names and they should have pictures, that would show who those persons that were targeted were, and the fact that through forensic investigation and, of course, research, they will be able to identify that either through their DNA or whatever it is that they do to confirm that the persons killed were actually those targets. Now, the reason why this is important, Jeffrey, is in every campaign, counterterrorism campaign, you have three components. You have, on the one hand, the state, which is the government, and of course its agencies. Then you have the bad guys, and then you have the audience. Now, the campaign is really about winning the audience. If actions like this that lead to death are not managed properly, then it now provides the bad guys with a platform with which to use to recruit more members from that community. And so it is purposely because of this that I urge DHQ to tread carefully and be very mindful of the kind of statements that come surrounding this issue. Persons have died, properties have been burnt, and sentiments are extremely high. And at this point in time, what is important is to calm nerves and then be as transparent as possible so that the average person in that village, in Silami local government, where that incident happened, sees the authorities as actually going forward to protect him and to respect him, and not necessarily as an agent that led to his death or the death of his people. I did hear one of the foreign media houses interviewing a young girl who lost almost her entire family in that incident. So compassion is required, and I hope to see that from the statements that would come from the military. I do understand that it's a military operation. I do understand that it's meant to serve a purpose. I do understand that Lakurawa members were targeted, but that does not in any way defray the need to protect innocent lives. At the end of the day, how we protect those innocent lives would determine whether we win this counter-terrorism campaign or not. If we isolate the people by showing that, in fact, some of the operations can kill them, then we're never going to win the hearts and minds of the people. Let's always remember that that audience is really what we're trying to win. And the raison d'etre of every military operation should actually be the protection of innocent lives and property.
I know that in his statement, because I watched, we carried it live right here on Channels Television when he was briefing, he did some sort of say, look, it's regrettable that people died during this incident. I don't know whether they took responsibility. I don't think that was what was said. He just said regrettable that people had to die and all of that. He mentioned a few things. But I want us to go to the strategy. So in his statement, Abuba said they carried out some level of intelligence before this strike took place, this operation took place. And he talked about the fact that using technology to determine that these were actually the terrorists, and then there were foot soldiers, maybe in form of informant and all of that, they were also there to be sure. So the concern for persons like me and the rest of us would be, were they able to determine, how come they were able to, first of all, were they able to determine that these were a cache? If they were able to determine, is it possible to determine how far-reaching this secondary explosion could go to maybe stop the level of casualty that we recorded so far, if you understand my drift?
Oh, definitely. And in fact, if there was that level of intelligence, why did we now use the type of weapon that we used? Intelligence would have given you a very clear picture of what you are dealing with, who you're going to target, what were the kind of, as it were, materials that could explode if you target that person. So at that point in time, once you have that kind of intelligence, would you still go ahead to use the kind of weapons that you use? Or were there other weapons that you could have used? Or were there other ways to draw out the target away from the house where he was into an open area where you now target him? So, I mean, the question of intelligence raises some, I would say, doubt regarding the veracity, as it were, of the intelligence that was collected. And then, of course, based on that intelligence, the decision to use that particular weapon was arrived at. Again, I want to emphasize that the essence of every operation should be the protection of human lives. We should keep targets, collateral damage, to the barest minimum. In certain instances where the value of the target is so high that you decide to go ahead and whatever collateral damage you incur, then in that instance, you should be able to show in very clear terms to the Nigerian public that this is the target. And that is why you had to take the decision to take out that target. Because, of course, that high-value target could go ahead and kill 100 persons, 1,000 persons. And so killing 10 persons to save 100 persons is a decision that you took. We've not had that yet. So that's my point around transparency, who is the target, why was that decision taken at that point in time, knowing very well that there were bombs that could explode in this secondary nature that could lead to death. The villagers are waiting to hear that. We need to win their hearts and minds by showing this level of transparency.
We must thank the military for what they do, but these questions are necessary because if the whole idea is to protect lives and lives are being lost, then these questions arise. So how would you describe from an expert's point of view, whether it's secondary or primary explosion that led to the death, was this a mistake or just one of those collateral damages that come with scenarios like this?
Well, at this stage, we just have to go with the statement by the DHQ saying that these are secondary devices. And the scenario painted is that the individual that was targeted is a logistics supplier for the Lakurawa group. In other words, he gathered IED materials in the form of maybe, name them, fertilizer, all the materials they use in putting together an IEDs. And so perhaps some of the materials had already been put together. I'm just trying to conjure a mental image of what the spokesperson, General Buba, of the DHQ meant by saying these are secondary explosions. Because even if they are just materials that have not been put together, that type of explosion would not happen. But if they've been put together into bombs, waiting for delivery, and then that attack happened, then yes, we could see those kind of explosions. But I think what is even more important is for an inquiry, an independent inquiry actually, to be conducted so that some of these issues are actually verified. My worry is that there is a pattern. I think in the recent past, we've seen about 4 instances of this type of collateral damage. It happened in Nasarawa, it happened in Zamfara, it happened in Borno State before then, and then now in Sokoto State. These are all instances of collateral damage, as it were, blue on blue, or direct targeting of civilians. It shouldn't be the case, really. We do, like you indicated, honor and respect the military for what they do, but we need to also remind the military that the essence of those operations is to protect civilian lives. And where civilian lives are lost, it should be accountable. There should be a transparent process of accountability. So where errors that could have been prevented happened, then we should make sure that those errors don't repeat themselves. As an example, if the intelligence was credible and the intelligence did indicate that there was explosives there that could detonate and lead to this type of death, why did we use that particular weapon to take out that individual? Was the value of that individual so high to us that we could, as it were, afford to lose this number of lives? These are questions that I think deserve answers.
Okay, before we go to issues around geopolitics, before I leave this issue, I know that it mentioned thanking the people that helped in intelligence and all of that. My worry is about reprisal on one hand, and you've mentioned this in passing, and I want you to speak broadly, using this incident in Sokoto to posit it as much as possible, what this does to collaboration between civilians and the military when it comes to collateral damages like this and the bigger picture of the fight against terrorism.
Well, I would like to commend the military for the confidentiality around this operation. Till date, I haven't had any either slip of tongue or any release that would indicate where the intelligence came from. And that's how it should be. Operational planning should have that level of confidentiality. And I think the military has exercised that in this instance. So unless if going forward, there is revelation as to who or where the intelligence was gathered or derived from, or there was some form of collaboration with local persons within that instance, I do not expect any reprisal attack. But having said that, we should not let down our guards. The level of public protection in those locations, there are 4 local governments in Sokoto and Kebbi where the Lakurawas have been operational. And I know that the level of public protection in those 4 local governments is extremely high. So we shouldn't let down our guards. We should increase that level of protection. We should make sure we have rapid response squads that are ready to be deployed in the event. Because the challenge is this, Geoffrey, if you look at the map of Sokoto and Kebbi, there is the possibility of movement. And we've already seen that at the first operations, we saw a dislocation of these bad guys. They were dislocated to parts of Zamfara and possibly even further down. We saw bombs going off in Niger State. So we should have that in mind, and the level of public protection should be as such. I mean, if I was going to advise, why don't we do a concentric cycle of perhaps 3 cycles? The first concentric cycle around the 4 local governments, the next concentric cycle expanding it to, just do a scenario. What if they go to route A or route B, route C? So have that level of protection in that. And then the third concentric cycle should be further down, including perhaps the next country we are going to discuss, which will be Niger, possibly. Because, of course, they could decide to go to Niger, hibernate there for a while, and then come back to Nigeria at some point. That kind of concentric cycle with different levels of protection across these 3 concentric cycles would allow us. And then, of course, I did speak about a rapid response squad that would be deployable in minutes to go to locations where these guys may decide to emerge. Not too long ago, the police released a statement which I felt was a little bit questionable, admitting that the bombs that went off in Zamfara came actually from that Lakurawa group. So the possibility of them dislocating to Zamfara is extremely high. We must increase our level of protection. Our intelligence gathering capabilities should be as such that any chatter, any indication of the emergence of that group in any location, we are ready to respond to it. And we don't need to reinvent the wheel, Jeffrey. We already have processes contained in our strategies, our national counterterrorism strategy, our policy framework on countering violent extremism, and on our Terrorism Prohibition and Prevention Act as amended 2022. All of these are documents that would allow us to actually ensure that our intelligence gathering capabilities across these recommended 3 concentric cycles that I have just mentioned is fit for purpose, and we're able to take note of any emergence. An emergence could mean someone just going to buy battery in a shop, in a village. If before the owner of that shop is just selling 2 batteries, then all of a sudden he sells maybe 20, 30 batteries. Or perhaps the person is looking for a vehicle batteries. Those are little intelligence that we should be able to pick up, because these are components that can be used for IEDs.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't mean to cut you, but let's move on to some things that are happening in the geopolitics. This recent allegation by General Chani of Niger against Nigeria, he's made very strong allegations. Of course, the Nigerian government has refuted, the NSA, ECOWAS has refuted as well. So his claims broadly covers the fact that maybe Nigeria is in cahoots with France, given the relations of the president with France and some of the trips he's made, even making claims like Nigeria trying to, quote unquote, destabilize Niger with being cahoot in France, things like establishing or allowing Lakurawa to find expression in certain parts of the north. He's made these claims, and some people have identified the fact that he chose to speak in Hausa. So let's address it one after the other. Is he just grasping at straw, or what exactly is he doing at the moment?
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. And this is what I did. When I first heard of the video, the first thing I tried to do was to verify the authenticity of the video. And of course, after I verified it, I asked myself the critical question: what is this guy trying to achieve? He's the president of a country, and the official language in that country is French. And then, of course, the generality of people there do speak Hausa. So why did he speak in Hausa? And my answer, led me to the conclusion of what I've always known over the last 1.5 years, since July last year when the coup in that country occurred. So his grand strategy is simple. He's showing up support for the junta that he leads. The support that he has been able to gain up to date is grounded around the anti-French sentiment And every time he makes statements to suggest that France is doing ABC, XYZ, he is shoring up that local support. He's been able to sustain that local support up until now. Let's not forget that it's one of the only countries in the sub-region where a military coup has occurred, that a transition plan is yet to be released. And unfortunately, because for some reason we haven't used the machinery of the media to put pressure on him, he's actually putting pressure on us. So he's come out with that statement in Hausa with spurious allegations. And I mean, even he himself knows that those allegations, a lot of them are baseless, but he still went ahead to do them because he's targeting that support, that sentiment that allows him to remain in power and to do the types of things that he's doing in the country. So how should we take it as a country? Should our response be in kind to just deny the allegation, or should we now ask ourselves, since it's a strategy, a propaganda strategy, what should we do? And I think this is where perhaps the focus of government should be. We need to be a step ahead. If his essence is shoring up local support by pushing this anti-French resentment, and we've decided as a country that we want to be close to France, which is perhaps what seems obvious to me, then we should be ready for such propaganda, and then we should be ready to lead in terms of the propaganda. And maybe in the course of the conversation, I would have some suggestions to throw in that regard. But at the moment, it is my view that we are not winning that propaganda, machinery, as it were. He is leading in it. He's speaking to the audience he wants to speak to, both locally in Niger and then here in Nigeria. Because, I mean, I don't know if you looked at the papers today and the social media, Niger is trending. The accusations that he laid are trending. And this is not to in any way belittle the response by the Nigerian authorities. I've had 3 cabinet ministers, including the National Security Advisor, granting interviews on the issue, and all of them with very clear statements that deserve a level of commendation. But my point is, at this stage, what we need is not response. It is to lead the propaganda so that he chases us to make sure that it is our desire that is being achieved. We have the resources at our disposal are so much that we can actually do that, and not necessarily to just respond to the spurious allegations that he has made.
All right, I'm going to come to you to come straight to that suggestion you talk about in how to respond. But just before that, I know that you've said this before, but people have suggested a lot, just like you suggested, because I know, for instance, learning from the military guys, they always strike during when there's general discontent. So the understanding we get is that the perception of the president's level of popularity in the north is what is cashing in on. Maybe looking at what some people in that region are saying, oh, there's nepotism in the federal government, or this tax reform bill that is at the core of the division that has gone even political and all of this. Now, given all of this scenario, you can't just throw these things away. Anything is possible, like you suggested. How should the government respond beyond releases?
Yeah. Number one is to use the diplomatic platform. We need to lay a foundation for a future response. So as an example, I've been told that the Nigerian ambassador in Nigeria has been invited by the foreign ministry. But I don't think that was covered in the media. We need to give it enough publicity. Cover it in the media, give it publicity, and then give him some form of timeline to produce evidence regarding the allegations. You and I know that those evidence will not be produced. And so we take it to the next level, which is to now show clearly that we've given him ample time. He has not produced it. And in essence, what it shows is that we're dealing with an individual who is perhaps not stable emotionally. And that also affects his credibility in terms of future statements he would make. And it also puts him on the response trajectory.
Is that not baiting, Mr. Adamo, is that not baiting for another coup to unseat him in the long run, the way you're narrating this?
Well, whatever it is we're
trying to transition him to civil rule, but doing this, are we not baiting for other military guys so you saw power from him?
Whatever strategy we decide to pursue, and because this is a public platform, I'm very mindful what I say. My point is that we should not allow him to lead the propaganda machinery. By doing this, we put him on the defense. His credibility would be on the line, and he would have to defend his credibility. If, as a head of state, you grant an interview and you make spurious allegations, and then the country that you've alleged to be involved in has now given you an opportunity to present evidence to it using diplomatic platforms, and then you don't, your credibility is questionable at that point in time. And we have different platforms that we can actually do that. So I think that's absolutely important. Second thing is to also look at his reasons. Of course, we've mentioned this idea of shoring up public confidence and then of course we've also talked about the sentiments in the North regarding the political situation in Nigeria at the moment. But one other thing we haven't mentioned is the economic reason, the Trans-Sahara oil pipeline. That's something that perhaps is also a reason. A lot of chatter around that Trans-Sahara gas pipeline, and France's position on that gas pipeline is something that we also need to look closely at. There is a lot of chatter suggesting, for instance, that some of the security circumstances that we're seeing in the region is geared towards achieving a particular objective with that gas pipeline. For some of us who don't have the background of that gas pipeline, it was meant to start from Nigeria through Niger into Morocco, all the way to Europe. But then there is another discussion at the moment that route should be changed into another direction, which is longer, but then it does not allow Niger and perhaps even Morocco to benefit from it. Algeria is also pushing for that. Point I'm trying to make is that this issue is not as simple as we seem to look at it. It's complex. It involves several international players. Russia is there. France is also there. And of course, countries like Algeria and Morocco are also there. And with Trump coming to power, his role would also play a huge impact, as it were, in this geopolitics. So I'm thinking that beyond just responding, we need to be a step ahead and identify all of these elements that I've mentioned. Perhaps a think tank of public and private individuals who understand this issue, who would advise government accordingly, need to be put in place.
As we begin to wind down, what do you think is a lesson we can learn from what is playing out with what General Chani is doing in terms of the economic outlook of the region and sometimes being used as bait for some of these things? What other broader conversation can we have? We may say, oh, things I'm saying is baseless and all of the things that government has said, but looking down, there's something he's trying to cash in on. What is that thing and how do we address it? Let's forget the politics now.
In simple terms, what is our foreign policy, Jeffrey? The centerpiece of our foreign policy used to be our neighbors, the coterminous countries around us. But then I'm getting the sense, and I say this with all sense of responsibility, that maybe we have jettisoned that with the current relationship we have with France. Because if all our neighbors, and I say this with all sense of responsibility, all our neighbors are kind of moving away from France, but we are now moving closer to France. So are we saying that the relationship we are going to have with France is more important than the relationship with these neighbors? If that is the situation, what have we put in place to prevent the consequence of such an action? If we're doing it without this knowledge, then this is the time for us to really sit down and ask this critical question. I'm not here to question government's motive in terms of its relationship with France, but we need to ask ourselves, is it what the relationship we're having, or can we now have a situation, a relationship where our friends, our neighbors feel relaxed and comfortable with us, while at the same time we have a relationship with France? These are questions that need answers. So the broad issue that we need to put in place is that our security is paramount, and whatever would allow us achieve security and, of course, economic stability, we should pursue, irrespective of which country. What is permanent in any international relationship is interest, and in this instance, it should be our interest. If we've not defined our interest in this matter, then we should have done that yesterday. And we need to do it immediately so that that strategic direction is defined by our interest.
Mr. Adamu, you raised a very vital point in your closing, and that has to do with neighbors moving away from France, we're going close to France, as much as we have a right to relate with anybody we want based on our interests. But I think that's a very strong point you've raised. And this is an ongoing conversation. Our eyes and our ears are down to see what's playing out along the region. Thank you so much, Kabiru Adamu, CEO Beacon Security and Intelligence Limited and a security consultant. Your insights were quite helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
All right, to take a quick break now. When we come back, we switch gears, this time not security. We want to look at the prioritization of policies of the government under President Bola Tinubu and how it's impacting you and I. Someone will join me to break it down for us. Join us again. Welcome back. Right here on Channel Television, we bring you up to speed with what's going on in the polity. And we're switching gears now away from issues around security to issues of policies of government. It's 27 days. Yes, I want to be sure my date is correct, because yesterday was Boxing Day. So we're looking at all of this. So we'll begin to wind down. The year begins to wind down. We've been joined in the program by Ms. Ayodele Adio, who's the National Publicity Secretary of the Youth Party and also a communication expert. Thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me.
You know, the thing about government, which is why I invited you, the thing about government is that every decision they take impacts all of us. Whether those decisions are right, whether they are wrong, or there are something in between. So as you look at 2024 in retrospect, we know we're still in 2024, but the few days before the end of the year. When you look at the policy priority of this government, what would you say they are, and how would you say they've impacted the citizens? Let's begin broadly.
Well, I mean, broadly speaking, I think the president has pursued three major policies. One, obviously, you know, the agricultural reform policy, their tax reform policy, you know, and obviously their bold economic reform policy, which has to do obviously with the removal of petrol subsidy, you know, the foreign exchange unification. And you have to tie that also to the monetary policy from the CBN, obviously, which has been a contractionary monetary policy that has sort of, you know, raised interest rates over the year, that has put pressure on businesses, particularly manufacturing businesses who have struggled, you know, to access funding because the cost of funding has, you know, risen astronomically. So for me, these are the three most important policies that have had very lasting impact on citizens, you know, particularly in 2024. And then we can look at how these policies have impacted us directly and whether they've had the kind of impact that the president and his team would have loved that they had in our lives.
So let's begin from, there are two levels of impact. So maybe you speak to it, the impact on citizens and the impact on businesses. Let's tail off from there.
So, I mean, let's start with the large economic policies and the impact on citizens and businesses. The reality is, as we speak today, if you looked at the report from the manufacturers who say that they have close to 400 billion worth of unsold good items, it tells you clearly that there is a consumption problem in the economy. And there's a consumption problem in the economy because citizens have seen their purchasing power dwindle significantly over the course of the year, largely due to high inflation and obviously largely due to the weakening of the currency. And so people cannot consume as much as they used to. And obviously that's had a very huge impact on businesses because they're not selling as much as they should. And the resulting effect is obviously that they are going to retrench workers going into 2025 should this persist going forward. You know, on the flip side, obviously, is the effect it's had on inflation. And that's the most devastating impact it's had on citizens, because as we speak today, you have 30 million Nigerians who are on the brink of starvation, largely because they cannot afford to buy food. Food inflation is at 40%, you know, as we speak today. In fact, I just recently read a new report that ranked Nigeria as the country where you find the highest amount. The price of buying food in Nigeria today is the highest in the world. The average household, yes, spends over 60% of household income on buying food. You compare that number with countries like Singapore, that's at 8.7%, or like Ireland, that's at 9%. You see that we're in a real cost of living crisis, and people cannot afford to just feed or transport. I mean, if you put food and transportation combined, it's close to 70% of household, expenditure. So that's the reality that the average Nigerian, is grappling with. There's not enough intervention being done, perhaps in agriculture or in the wider economy, to create as much safety nets as possible, or what you call a welfare state, to cushion the effect or the fallout of these policy positions that really has put Nigerians on the back foot. And I think that's the most devastating part of it.
There's something I want you to speak to and prepare Nigerians for, to the best of your ability, and that is the fact that when you look at the Constitution Section 16 also,
yes,
it tends to put Nigeria more of a welfarist position. That is a nuance, perhaps, if that's the best way to describe it. But we've seen two APC leaders, President Muhammadu Buhari. If we look at their political spectrum, the APC tend to be left of center. Welfare is when they started. Buhari seemed to be welfare. But we're now seeing President Tinubu in the same political party, who has a bit of, on the right side in terms of economic policy, is more of a conservative, because now he's pushing for a free market aggressively as possible. And he's defended his position. So there are two things that are going on. The president has said, I do not regret my policy. In fact, my ministers are performing well. That is the reality that Nigerians have to deal with. How should Nigeria deal with this going into 2025?
I mean, there are two things here. Let's deal with the first end, which is the fact that he says he believes in his policy. Obviously, you expect the president to believe in his program, and that's why he's pushed through some of these reforms, despite the political fallout of these reforms. Now, I think that the debate is not whether or not the president believes in his policy. I think where the debate should go is the succor that he provides to citizens, or in the interventions that he provides to cushion the impact of the policies that he's currently pursuing. Because this market-led neoliberal policies that he's currently pursuing, that has, pushed up the prices of energy, the prices of, whether it's gas, electricity, petrol, and what have you, it's making it extremely difficult for many Nigerians to survive and to consume at the end of the day. And at some point, you will need a level of intervention for you to, sort of re-spark the economy and bring it back to life. I know he promised a 75 billion intervention for businesses that are still not seeing the light of day. They promised a CNG policy, and adoption for the CNG policy has been abysmal, if you asked me. And so they promised cash transfers, if you'd like, and very few people have received these cash transfer programs. And so what it's leading to is a situation that the famous economist, John Maynard Keynes, one argued that in the long run we are all dead, because if you pursue this market-led economy and you push it to the limit, there's a limit to the amount of price shocks that this economy can absorb.
But they keep pushing to the effect that there is stability, we are in the right direction. That is the narrative of the government. How do you push back on that?
Again, you see, economics is always about choices, right? And it depends on the data that you're looking at. And the president and his team are quick to point to the fact that the economy has grown by 3.5%, is likely to do 4%. But that growth is masking and papering over a lot of cracks. Because in reality, for you to meet the target that the president has set for himself, the economy has to grow at least between 8 to 10% consecutively for a decade before we can double per capita income, right? And so at 4%, you're barely scratching the surface, and you're not growing as fast as you should in any case. So for me, if you're looking at these numbers that show that, okay, there's a marginal growth of 3.5%, I don't think that is sufficient enough to say that your economy or your policies are working as they should. Because when I look at the broad data, I'm looking at figures from manufacturing, I'm looking at figures from trade, I'm looking at the unemployment numbers, I'm looking at the jobs created across various sectors, and I see that the numbers are in red, then you have to question how how effective these policies are in any case. If I'm looking at the inflation numbers that have continued to climb steadily since February, if I'm looking at food inflation numbers that continues to climb, whether it's transportation costs that continues to climb, it's hard to make the argument that it's been as effective.
So
as
are you
it should.
saying that the Nigerian state isn't ready for a market economy as strongly proposed and defended aggressively by this president who is said to be very brave at the roots of his political career?
I have no problem with market, led economies or the neoliberal thinking, but you have to also admit that even the chief proponents of these neoliberal policies have had to also embrace a whole lot of welfarist policies to balance the impact of this.
That looks like tokenism in effect.
Well, it's not really tokenism, because the Germans, for instance, at the height of the Ukraine-Russian crisis, put a cap on gas prices across not just Germany but in Europe, because they wanted to protect their citizens from the impact of high energy prices. The Americans passed a huge inflation act that put $450 billion in electric vehicle subsidies and subsidized cheap manufacturing in their country and put billions of monies in rural belts and put monies in the hands of farmers, right? And they also did a huge cash transfer program. So even the proponents of neoliberal thinking are also adopting a huge welfarist package, because they don't want to leave citizens behind. And you can't, we're the poverty capital of the world, right? There's a tiny percent of Nigerians as we speak today that can afford to buy a home, that can afford to buy a car, that can even afford to feed.
So the silence of Nigerians, do you think it's cowardice or just a show of patriotism that the president said, just hold on, it's going to get better? What is playing out here?
I've run this through my head a million times, and I think that the president has to see himself as the luckiest politician in the world. Because given the current price shocks, given the economic realities of Nigerians, the fact that Nigerians are still largely understanding and are waiting to reap the benefits of his policies, I think is the biggest gift that he could ever ask for. And I hope that he doesn't throw this away. Because, listen, there's one interesting article I always love from Jeffrey Sachs, in 2020, when he wrote about cities that rebel, which rich cities that rebel. The Chilean economy was thrown into turmoil of huge protests when they raised the price of public transportation by 12%. Just 12%. And millions of people flooded the streets in San Diego. And I'm talking about a country that has a GDP per capita income of close to $19,000. Mind you, a GDP per capita is less than $2,000.
It's less than $2,000, yeah.
And yet they flooded the streets for just 12% increase in the cost of public transportation. So I think the president is lucky, and I just hope that they do not throw this away, by doing right by Nigerians and making sure that going into 2025, there has to be some gains that are being picked up.
Well, there's still more conversation on this, but in closing, I've always wanted to ask politicians, and you're a young politician in that regard. I do not think, by what we've seen, I've just told you that the APC looks like a welfarist, left of center.
Yes.
The PDP is more of the right of center, but we've seen Muhammadu Buhari do left of center.
Yes.
But President Tinubu is doing more of the right of center in its economic policy as a market-free and all of that within the same political party. So it feels like generally politicians in Nigeria is not driven by ideology. So should we be bothered about this? Do you think it's time for us to begin to look at the Constitution, say Section 109, subsection 1G, of all these defections and just take it out of our Constitution so that you guys can defect freely? Since it's not in closing.
No, to be honest, I think what the state of our country calls for today is a lot of pragmatism and a lot of patriotism, and people who will do right by Nigeria, people who will pursue a lot of fiscal discipline and will do what is necessary to drive growth, to drive productivity, and to lift millions of people out of poverty. You see, the idea about left of center or right of center may never be here nor there. What we really need at this time is a lot of pragmatism, a lot of compassion, and a lot of clarity of focus to lift people out of poverty and to pursue policies that will...
You didn't answer my question. Should we allow you guys defect? Review the Constitution so that you can defect as you like.
Because the Constitution is
some politicians in 20 years have been in 5 political parties. So what's the point? And there's no consequence for all of that. But that will be a conversation for another day.
Yeah, because the Constitution is clear on that. At least for legislators, if you defect,
we're reviewing the Constitution. That's why I'm reviewing it. Ayodele Adio, National Publicity Secretary of Youth Party, quite brilliant submission and a communication expert. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
We hope to have more of you
pleasure.
in some of these conversations.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. I'll keep reminding you, 27th of December is today. The new year is just a few days away. I hope you have a beautiful weekend. I'm Jeffrey Uzama. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.